Welcome to Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe. For centuries, gays and lesbians have been rejected by the church. But since the Stonewall riots in 1969 that gave birth to the gay liberation movement, there has been increasing debate in the church about sexuality in general and homosexuality in particular. Within the United Church of Canada, there is an organization for gay men and lesbians called Affirm, which celebrates its 10th anniversary this year. And with me to talk about Affirm, its history and successes, failures, disappointments, and so on, are two members of Affirm, Rosemary Carnahan, who is the current spokesperson for Affirm, and also a former co-chair of Affirm with Bill Siksay, who also joins me. And Bill was both a former spokesperson and co-chair with Rosemary. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Brad.
Great to have you here. Rosemary, you are the spokesperson for Affirm currently. Just describe Affirm to me.
Well, Affirm is the organization of gays and lesbians, as you mentioned, and it's an organization that primarily started out of a support network. An integral part of Affirm is the fact that as gays and lesbians in the church, we want to spend time in worship and celebrate our sexuality in the context of our spirituality. And also, a big part of Affirm has been to work within the national church in a lobby capacity, trying to further rights and place for gays and lesbians in the church.
So in other words, so there is that advocacy or lobby part of Affirm,
Yes.
also a worshiping, gathering community and support. Other areas that you would highlight as integral to who Affirm is?
No, those would be the three main areas.
Three?
Yeah.
Okay. Affirm is celebrating 10 years, and Bill, you have been involved with Affirm for the 10 years. How did it all start?
Well, I think it comes out of the United Church tradition of being interested in progressive social movements and also being part of progressive social movements. The United Church has had a long history of interest in issues around human sexuality. In fact, way back in the 1930s, the first national policy statement of the church was around human sexuality, and for the time said something fairly radical, that our sexuality was twofold. It was procreative and recreative, and the recreative part was fairly radical for the time.
Recreative meaning recreational kind of enjoyment,
pleasurable,
playful, so on?
those sorts of things. So it comes out of a long tradition of dealing with those kinds of issues in our church. I think more recently, with you mentioned the Stonewall riots and the rise of the modern gay and lesbian movement, Affirm grew out of a number of regional gatherings of gay and lesbian people who had a church connection. There were a group of people in Montreal area, mainly clergy. There were clergy and lay people in Saskatchewan called One Loaf. There was a group in Toronto called Touch, the Toronto Organization of United Church Homosexuals, and there was a group in Vancouver called Gays and Lesbians of the United Church in British Columbia. And they all started late 70s, early 80s and began meeting. It wasn't until 1982 that we gathered as a national organization, and that was around the General Council of the United Church, which was in Montreal that year. And we had our first national meeting, picked the name of Affirm, and went from there.
Okay, 10 years later, Affirm's been around for 10 years, and since those days, the United Church has taken some pretty radical steps. I mean, the United Church ordains openly gay and lesbian people. Also, at the recent General Council, gave approval for congregations to have same-sex covenanting services, and those are pretty big steps. Is that a surprise to you, Bill?
Well, it's a pretty remarkable achievement. We're the only denomination that I know of in North America that has accomplished those kinds of things. The other Canadian denominations are nowhere nearly in the same place that we are. The American denominations have had a very divisive time with gay and lesbian issues. And I think it's quite a special achievement that the United Church has managed. So, yeah, I am kind of surprised. I think that we all knew that it was going to be a long and an interesting road, but I don't think we thought we'd be quite where we are today.
So it's gone a little faster than you expected.
Well, I guess we didn't have anything to measure it by.
Right.
I guess around the ordination issue, we often compared it to the ordination of women. And we knew that even though the United Church started ordaining women back in the 1930s, that it wasn't until recently that there's been sort of widespread acceptance of the ordained ministry of women in the United Church. So that was a long haul, and we see some of the same parallels, but in terms of getting that initial policy statement, I think it came maybe a little faster than we thought.
Okay, Rosemary, you're a more recent member of Affirm, the United Church organization for gay men and lesbians. How did you hear about Affirm, and have you known about it from the beginning, or what's your story and your relationship with Affirm?
Well, I was actually at the General Council of Montreal when Affirm was born, although I wasn't connected or in the know about what was happening. And it was when I was actually living in Victoria, and the issue around sexuality became more up front in the church. And I was attending workshops and things. And in Victoria, there are very few gay and lesbian people in the church who are out. And so I, by distance, sort of associated myself with the local Affirm group here in Vancouver. And then when I moved to Vancouver, I actually became an active member of Affirm. But I was able to be at the General Council in Victoria when the church made the positional statement about looking at opening the church to the possibility of self-declared homosexuals being ordained or to be considered for ordination.
What kind of an experience was that for you?
It was a wonderfully liberating experience. I thought finally the church is getting to the point of acknowledging in a real way that we are present in the church and are maybe making some tentative first steps to trying to help us to feel welcome. I think what's happened in the interim is that, and certainly as a result of the Victoria event, was that this year at General Council, where I was the spokesperson, Council was much more reticent to make any definite decisions. And when you mentioned earlier that the church has given approval for same-gender covenants, we would interpret as gays and lesbians that we now have congregational approval to do that. Other people would interpret it as it's up to the congregation to decide, and they can say no. So in a sense, we don't have the affirmation of those happening in quite the same direct way as I think we got as the statement in '88 was.
Okay, a little later on I want to talk more about the same-sex covenanting services. But the question for both of you is that for many gay and lesbian people, they left the church, felt totally alienated from the church, and can often feel quite hostile to the church. Mm-hmm. What kept you in it, over all these years?
And those are all quite reasonable things to feel, given the history of the way the church has treated gay and lesbian people and treated our families around our issues. For me, I have been a lifelong member of the United Church. I grew up going to church and Sunday school every Sunday and maintained that for some strange reason through university when other people were sort of dropping away from the church. So I've always had that interest. For me, being a minister in the United Church was a career goal for me, and I had a sense of call to ministry as well that I wanted to explore, and came to the seminary here in Vancouver to do that from back east. So for me, Affirm was a place where I could continue to work on my sense of call and gift for the ministry, and the United Church was a place that there was an opening for me as a gay person to do that. I think I decided to risk being out with the church because my church was a progressive church that liked to struggle with issues and didn't ask people not to be themselves when they presented themselves for ministry. And all of the work that I did in that process sort of pushed me to come out in that process, tell the supervisory people, my own congregation, sent people at the seminary that I was gay, and asked that we struggle through that together to see if there was in fact a place for Bill Siksay, as I am, in the United Church of Canada. And that struggle always seemed worthwhile to me. The church is a hopeful place for me, partly because of our history, partly because of the people who choose to be there. And not everybody has that same experience of the church. I think I've been lucky with the people that I have met. I've been part of liberal congregations or progressive congregations in my history.
So you've felt accepted and affirmed yourself personally through your experience in the church, and that's both growing up and also coming out as a gay man. Okay. Rosemary, what's kept you in the church?
Well, certainly for me, my spiritual journey has really been an integral part of my life, and my discovery of my lesbianism came along as a part of that. And so I had this really strong connection to the church. And as I ventured out and began to explore more of my own sexuality, the United Church was one place where that was more a possibility. And I felt encouraged, I felt supported, I felt through connections with other gays and lesbians in Affirm nationally across the country, there's been the opportunity to know that you're not alone. And I think that the issue around safety and the ability to be oneself within the church is really what's kept me there. And I presently worship in a congregation that is quite open and accepting, and my partner and I are considered a couple in that congregation.
And have you been through a same-sex covenanting
Yes,
service?
we have.
Okay, say something about that. What was that? How did you reach that decision? I mean, was that an important thing in your relationship? And how did you go about approaching a congregation?
Well, it was very important in our relationship, and because making commitment to each other and having that in the context of our faith was central. And fortunately, we happened to worship in a congregation that was fairly gay positive, although I don't know that there were any congregational members who were completely out. And so it was with some trepidation that we decided that we wanted to do this public. We considered it a public event, and we spoke with the minister, and he was quite willing to conduct the service. And so during a time at the beginning of one of the Sunday services, we stood up and invited the congregation to come and celebrate. And we called it a celebration of blessing and promise, because for gays and lesbians, there has been very little structure around what you call a service of commitment, how you celebrate your relationship. And so for us, a celebration of blessing, because we were asking God's blessing, and of promise, because we were making a commitment to each other, seemed a nice way to describe it.
Why call it a service of blessing or promise, or a same-sex covenanting service, or something like that, and why not marriage?
Well, I think because marriage has, for a lot of people, a lot of legal implications, and people get really uptight when you talk about a gay marriage. And I think that for most people, at least for me as a lesbian, I don't want to be using language that is inflammatory to people. I want people to understand that what we're doing is making a commitment, and it's a celebration of that commitment, as a marriage is for heterosexual people in some context. And I think that that's the focus that, for me, I want to have.
Just before I move on to the next question, how long ago was your service of blessing and promise?
It was last year, a year ago July. So.
A year ago July. Yeah. Terrific.
It was terrific too. It was
and
lots
you
of
were
fun.
There, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. You both talk about having had very positive experiences in congregations and growing up in the church and then as coming out as gay and lesbian people, and that is certainly not universal.
No.
In any way. And I have a hard time imagining and believing that every United Church congregation is going to be a safe place for gays and lesbians to go to and to feel welcome and affirmed and so on. And it strikes me that's one of the things that the United Church has really struggled with, is in a sense by making policy that is very positive, gay positive, you still can't legislate welcome. What is happening to make congregations more welcoming places? Bill?
Well, I think the attitude has changed somewhat. It's not a completely outrageous idea to suggest that an openly gay or lesbian person might participate in a United Church congregation, as it might have been 10 or 15 years ago. So that there's that general idea has been planted and sown and is bearing some fruit. I think that the fact that there are gay and lesbian people who are out and open and choosing to participate in congregations has made a big difference. Any congregation that I know of where there are gay and lesbian people participating and where other people in the congregation know, it's changed the life of that congregation in a fairly significant way. It's, I think, opened other possibilities to them for inclusion and discussion that hadn't existed before, and returned a kind of normalcy that in some sense doesn't exist in congregations where it's still a hot issue or an issue to be debated or an issue that causes tension. So that there's that kind of opening as well.
What are some of the gifts that gay men and lesbians bring to a congregation?
Well, we've argued this in gay and lesbian groups for years, if we have any kind of special spiritual gifts, because gay and lesbian people seem to be widely represented among clergy.
And first of all, always have been. I mean, this is not something new. Gays and
No,
lesbians have
no.
always been in the Christian church since the very beginning.
But I think one of the things that I think that's different about our experience is that we've grown up with a sense when we were younger or until we came out that we were somehow different. And we grew up with certain sensitivities around that, senses of confidentiality, of being quiet, of observing, of being quietly supportive. And those are often gifts that are associated with people in ministry. I think too that, that the resolve that it takes to come out, the kind of confidence and the kind of determination that it takes to come out and actually declare that you're a gay or lesbian person in our society, which as yet is still often unsupportive, is a kind of character thing that people look for in their clergy, the ability to speak your mind, to speak with faith and confidence. And so I think that often that aids in that kind of development in our lives.
Just again, personally, for the two of you, you are and have been the national spokesperson for a gay and lesbian group for the United Church of Canada. Was that a risky decision in itself to do that?
It was for me. I was given the opportunity to be the spokesperson in Affirm when I moved to Vancouver, and I'm working in a job that I don't suffer any risk of losing my employment because I am an openly gay person or lesbian. And so for me that was a very significant step, because previously I wasn't in an employment situation where I could be that way. So I think, and that's an important issue, because we're talking about livelihood here in being out, and so it becomes a very close to the heart issue when you talk about, you know, your source of livelihood being threatened.
Was it a risk for you? A scary thing to do, or something that just sort of seemed like a natural evolution?
Well, it seemed an important thing for me to do. It wasn't easy to reconcile with my family about why I needed to be that open about being gay. We were okay on sort of familial terms about me being gay, and there was an acceptance of that. But the publicity thing was something that my family found very difficult, my parents found very difficult. And so there's a lot of that sort of thing to work through as well. I think too that you sometimes set yourself up for hostile reactions from people you don't know. And I've had phone calls that have not been pleasant from people who managed to find out who I was and track me down and say abusive things into my answering machine or to me personally. So those sorts of things aren't fun, and it reminds you of the danger that's still represented for gay and lesbian people, the violence that affects our lives from time to time. But there have been positive things too. I mean, doing a national TV program almost 10 years ago and representing Affirm when I was spokesperson, walked in the Peace Walk in Vancouver the next week and had 40 people who I didn't know come up and say, "Saw you on TV and you were great and I think it's wonderful." So there was always that kind of positive reinforcement for me, which made me believe that what we were doing was important, and important to people across society, not just within the United Church.
And I was just going to say that for me at General Council this year, the support that I received from the commissioners, the other people attending General Council, was wonderful. I mean, people I didn't know at all who were very supportive, openly supportive of me, was a really positive affirmation of who I was and who I was representing, and that was a real encouragement.
Bill?
And we've seen people within Affirm who are associated with it take steps to be more open and confident about who they are. Back in I guess it was 83, when we were working on one of the first reports that went to the church, Affirm in Vancouver was charged with representing gay and lesbian people in the United Church to this task group. And we held a meeting, and we invited people to come and go and meet with the task group and talk about our lives. And at that point, there were only 2 of us who were out and able to do that. But we issued an open invitation to the group. The night of the meeting, 15 people from Affirm gathered in the chapel at the seminary here in Vancouver, and we went into that meeting together. And it was a significant turning point, I think, in the life of our church. It was a turning point in the lives of those 15 people who, for the first time in any kind of public forum, were able to say that they were gay or lesbian. But it was a turning point for the 10 people on the task group who watched some of their most trusted colleagues in ministry walk into that room not knowing that they were gay or lesbian.
And they had no idea.
Yeah, saw some of their closest friends who they'd suspected but had never had it confirmed. And the whole tenor of the operation of that task group changed when the reality of the lives of some of the people that they cared about most were presented to them in that
So you're saying that reality of the task force changed when they were able to put real faces and names and real relationships onto the issue.
When the issue was incarnated in actual living embodied people. And
with people that they know and respect and like and have worked with and so on.
It's a good theological theme to hit Christians with, because when we take incarnation so seriously in our faith.
Okay, so following up on that theme then, 10 years have seen a tremendous change in terms of society's attitude toward homosexuality as well, included gay rights included in human rights legislation. What impact has the United Church, seeing that the two of you have been so closely involved with the United Church, what impact have the discussions that the United Church has had and the decisions they've made on that, if any?
Well, people can't get away with saying the Bible condemns homosexuality anymore. You can't make that blanket statement without realizing that there are a lot of Christians who will take you on that kind of statement. So before, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that would have been a generally held kind of tenet in people's understanding of Christianity. Now it's at least debated and debatable. And I think that that's largely, we can thank the United Church and the debate that we've had.
What do you say to people when they do say that to you, that homosexuality is a sin or you're condemned?
Well, I mean, it's a long conversation.
No, I mean, but briefly, I mean, if
I don't believe
standing
that
at the bus stop.
Well, that's never happened to me. But I mean, I think it's part of a longer dialogue that you would want to have with that person. But I would start by saying, well, that's not the way my understanding of my faith as a Christian would have me respond to someone, and we'd start from there. But I think there's all kinds of stuff underlying that we might get into. But I mean, I think the United Church has changed the attitudes around how people would approach a gay or lesbian person too. I don't think you would approach somebody with that. Certainly in the church, you wouldn't hit them with that kind of question anymore. I don't think that's seen as an acceptable approach, no matter where you are on the issue. The other thing I think the United Church did that was really significant was in 1984, the report that went to the General Council that year, and which was turned down by the General Council that year, and which argued for the ordination of gay and lesbian people, was printed in its entirety in the United Church Observer, which is one of the largest circulation magazines in the country, and we figured at the time that 800,000 people would have had a chance to read that. And I think that's the widest distribution of any gay positive document ever in this country. And that went everywhere.
So that brought it into the homes and living rooms and kitchens of people.
Of ordinary
people right across in small communities and large communities, and of people who didn't know that they knew gay and lesbian people or whatever.
And challenged a lot of people, but gave hope to a lot of people who either knew gay or lesbian people or who were gay or lesbian themselves.
Okay, at the same time, I mean, you're involved in Affirm, and Tim Stevenson, an openly gay man who was ordained last May, has not been able to be settled in the United Church of Canada. Is that a signal that on some level the church is still not ready to deal with openly gay men or lesbians as ministers?
Yes, it is, and I think that what it points out to us is that at the congregational level, people are still very afraid. They're still lacking knowledge and understanding. They're lacking the chance of, or the knowledge of actually knowing a gay or lesbian person. And I think that the task before the church, and certainly before gays and lesbians, is to challenge congregations to talk about it, to discuss it, to look at what it would be like to have an openly gay minister. What are they afraid of? What are the questions that they have inside that they're so afraid to ask?
Which are the starting questions? I mean, because, I mean, how can someone begin to know what it would be like if one doesn't know someone? I mean, if they have never had the experience or don't know what it's like. I mean, there are so many stereotypes.
Well, I think one of the first questions we need to ask congregations is, what are you afraid of?
Okay.
What are you looking for to take it into the arena of being proactive and say, okay, we have a person who feels all of these qualities that you're looking for, but on this characteristic is one that you're getting caught on, and what is it? What is it that you're afraid of? So let's bring it out and discuss it.
Bill, I was going to say that I think the church has failed in its sort of task of preparing congregations for openly gay or lesbian ministers. We knew Tim's been a candidate for a long time before he was ordained, so we knew he was coming along through the system. And I think there could have been more work, like Saskatchewan Conference has agreed to do at their meeting this past spring, where they agreed to set up 10 or 12 congregations that had worked through the process of accepting a gay or lesbian minister, so that it's sort of an affirmative action program for congregations in Saskatchewan, so that down the road there'll be 10, 12 places where gay and lesbian people can go, where congregations can call those people and not go through that whole turmoil of saying, well, is this person an appropriate person to be a minister in our congregation solely because they're gay or lesbian? They'll be over that question and on to the questions of, is this person to have a theological perspective that's compatible with our congregation? Do they have the kinds of skills for ministry we're looking for in a minister?
Will a program like that be expanded to cover other parts of the country?
Well, if other conferences choose to do it, I'm sure they will.
Again,
And I think what Affirm has done is risen to the challenge and has developed this program, which they call the Affirming Congregations Program, where we're asking congregations to talk, to dialogue, to work in process with each other through that to the point where they feel they can make a public statement that yes, we would like to welcome a gay or lesbian person to our congregation, to work amongst us, and even to minister to us.
So congregations have that option of making the decision collectively and in
right.
some with some process, deciding whether or not a congregation in the United Church wants to be an affirming congregation. There, there's also a group called Friends of Affirm. What is Friends of Affirm?
Well, Friends of Affirm is sort of our auxiliary. It's people who help us in the work that we do, are supportive to us, have helped us with presentations to the church, with meetings that we've gone to, planning strategy, fundraising, those sorts of things. It's fairly loosely organized. In Toronto, for instance, they meet regularly. Here in Vancouver, they've had some regular meetings in the past. But they're a group of people who are supportive, who probably aren't gay or lesbian themselves.
In the process of the debate that the United Church has had, one of the expressions that I heard a lot was that there was pain. And people who were against the gay ordination said that they were suffering and were in pain, and people were insensitive to their pain. And at the same time, there seems to be pain on all sides. How did that make you feel?
Well, I guess to some extent I was pleased that they were feeling some pain, because gays and lesbians have been marginalized and have suffered oppression and been hurt numerous times in numerous situations. And maybe a little part of me was glad that finally they were having somewhat of the same experience.
So that then perhaps from that there'd be empathy. Speaking of empathy, people can reach you, the two of you, or the organization Affirm?
Yes.
And how would they do that? They would...
We advertise in Angles, and there's a contact number there. That we have a telephone number where people can leave a message. And we also have a mailing address where people can write in and ask for information.
And that address is going to come up on the screen, and so people can write and get more information about that. The address is Affirm, Box 34458, Station D, Vancouver, BC, V6J4L6. And that, of course, is for Affirm, for an organization for gay men and lesbians in the United Church of Canada. And meetings happen regularly and so on?
Yes, the first Friday of the month. In the evening, and we meet in different people's homes. So if people are interested in participating in that, then they need to make a connection either through the mailing address or through the phone.
Great. Rosemary Carnahan and Bill Siksay, I want to thank you both for being with me here in Pressure Point.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I've been talking with Rosemary Carnahan, Bill Siksay, two members of Affirm, an organization for gay men and lesbians in the United Church of Canada. Thanks for watching Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe.